Ready? Yeah. Okay. Good evening. I'm Klaus Hartmann. I'm Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Academic Affairs at the Phillips Collection. And I'm very pleased to welcome everyone tonight to our second conversation with artists this season, and the very first conversation with artists in our ARC space. Since 2017, the Phillips Collection's workshop and gallery at the ARC, which stands for Town Hall Education Arts Recreation Campus, has been providing a space to view, discuss, and make and exhibit art. All programs are co-created with our partners and participants to encourage authentic community dialogue, community planning, and community action. Our work is about making friends, sustaining relationships, and bringing joy. All right, so this conversation, like all conversations, have been since 2015 in partnership with the University of Maryland. It's always been two parts, tonight's conversation, and tomorrow the artists will visit with the students at the campus at UMD. I should say that I'm introducing Jennifer and Kevin McCoy, but only Kevin is going to be present, and he can explain that. So Jennifer and Kevin McCoy's work as media artists evaluates how conventions of viewing become shorthand for experience, often eliding and misrepresenting reality. To this end, they build active systems for art creation and viewing. In their work, technology serves as a mediator between the human and the world, and as an active force that not only shapes its material, but reframes the entire project of what we choose to see. In addition, Kevin McCoy is credited with creating the first proto-NFT, we can talk about this, which he publicly presented with the technologist Anil Dash in New York in the spring of 2014. And McCoy's work has been widely exhibited in the US and internationally, including at the Pompidou Center, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, BFI, British Film Institute in London, Hanover Kunstverein. I'm going to skip a few. Their work can be seen in the collections of MoMA in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Milwaukee Art Museum, the 21C Museum, and the Speed Museum. They received a Creative Capital Award in 2003, the Wyatt Rave Award for Art in 2005, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2011, and a Headlands Alumni Award in 2014. And they are represented by Postmasters Gallery in New York, old friends of mine, and Johansson Projects in Oakland, California. They will be in conversation with Brandon Morse, on my left, who is a Washington, DC-based artist who works with generative systems as a means to examine the ways in which physical phenomena, such as entropy and emergence, can function in ways that are both poetic and metaphorical. Through the use of code and the creation of custom computer software, he creates simulations of seemingly complex systems to create video installations that seek to draw parallels between the ways in which these systems work and the ways in which we, both individually and collectively, navigate the world around us. Brandon Morse has been teaching at the University of Maryland since 2000. He has exhibited his work in digital video and sound installations nationally and internationally. Exhibitions include the Corcoran Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., the Nanjing Museum in China, the American University Museum at the Katzen Center, the Kunsthalle Detroit, as well as gallery exhibitions across the United States, Europe, and Asia. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. So I'm running the show here for both of us, for both Jen and I, family, and as often sometimes is the case, family issues come up at the most inopportune times. This one was half an hour before we were heading out the door with a child coming home sick from school. So I'm here, but I can happily pull the weight for both of us. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to meet you, and thank you so much for the intro. The stuff that we pulled together for this talk is talking about, or leads to NFTs, because that's such a kind of topic of the moment right now, and of the role that I played in playing that story is important. But here, I've never talked about the NFT work in a kind of public kind of context, in the context of the arc of the work that we do, but I think that it's important to kind of tell that story. And so, to help in doing that, we put together some images that talk about kind of the history of media art in ways that make sense to us. That are kind of important milestones for the kinds of thinking and the kinds of work that Jennifer and I have been doing together for a long time. And so that's our title of NFTs in a long history of artist-made tools. Because when kind of the story of the birth and the emergence of NFTs that I did in 2014 really was coming out of this interest and engagement with artists making their own tools and making their own, especially in the media art context. So if we could go to that first slide, I've got a picture here of a Neptune Pike television set. So the two names on the screen, Neptune Pike and Shiya Abe, are kind of foundational names in the world of electronic art, media art, digital art. The names evolved over time. But Neptune Pike, in his work in video throughout the 60s and the 70s, really was foundational work and really important work. There's a beautiful piece here in DC at the Smithsonian Information Superhighway that I've yet to see in person, but hopefully maybe I'll get a chance to see. But his work has ranged across a whole bunch of different formats and some really important live stuff using satellites. But the picture on the screen here is pretty early work, and it's part of a collaborative work that he was doing with the Japanese engineer Shiya Abe. And Pike himself is Korean, and Shiya Abe is Japanese. And this particular object on the screen is called a wobblator, and it's one of the first tools that the two of them put together for that's really designed around manipulating a video signal, manipulating the signal directly. And so in the 60s, it was kind of the height of, well, we were kind of fully in the world of broadcast television. The world of quarter-pack video was kind of just emerging, and this work and some other sculptures that he did with magnets directly were interventions into the video signal in ways that really were not possible, and it was not really a way that people were thinking about that video image. Of course, there's a long history of artists on the experimental film world that are intervening into the material of the filmmaking process, and that had, by the mid 60s, was already going on for 50 years, if not more, in various ways. But in video, broadcast television has been happening for a while, but artists working with video is a new idea. And Pike, with his ideas about intervening into that signal directly, was really a novel idea and an important idea. And so this picture of the wobblator is pretty awesome. I made one when I was in grad school. You take a picture tube and you wrap it with speaker wire, and you treat it as if it was an audio speaker. You hook it up to an amplifier and you run sound through it, and it causes the picture to kind of shake back and forth. Have you ever seen a kind of speaker cone go back and forth like this? And when it's making sound, it's the same kind of magnetic movement that's deflecting the electron gun on the tube making the picture. So this is there's a number of beautiful sculptures he made incorporating this that produce this kind of work. But that direct sense of the video signal being having a material quality that an artist can engage with and adjust and change was a really important idea. Let's go to the next slides. I've got a picture of this is a still from Global Groove, which was a big live satellite, 24-hour live satellite performance that he did with artists and musicians around the world that incorporated, this is a picture of John Cage. He used a variety of image synthesis techniques throughout the course of this this presentation. Can we go to the next one from the Global Group? And there's this quote, this just really great quote from Neptune Pike that I think kind of sets the tone, a really interesting tone for this question of artists' engagement with technology, with tool making. And he was talking about the versatile color TV synthesizer, which was the kind of fun tongue-in-cheek name he gave to one of his devices that he made. The artist was envisioning a device that would enable us to shape the TV canvas as precisely as Leonardo, as freely as Picasso, as colorfully as Renoir, as profoundly as Mondrian, as violently as Pollock, and as lyrically as Jasper Johns. So, you know, it's interesting looking at this. You know, he's produced, he and Shuya Abe together had produced these devices that really allowed a kind of intervention into the signal in a very sculptural and painterly way. In other words, a very advanced technology, you know, they're inventing these devices, yet he's framing these things squarely within the history of art and history of kind of modernist history of art. And so he's placing these things in a very modernist tradition, and I think rightly so. And that sense of you know, he identifies these different artists to create this open expanse, to create this realm of possibilities. And so for those who have knowledge of these art historical figures, you can kind of map these out in your mind, you know, as he's encouraging you to do, and just imagine this open field. And so in a pre-digital age, in a pre-software age, he's really describing this kind of unlimited manipulation of the video image. And again, in a pre-analog age, it's pretty remarkable to kind of have that sort of scope and goal in mind. Can we go to the next slide? And so this takes us to kind of the next character in our story. So this is David Jones, and we're watching a video from YouTube of him. We have the sound off. He does a very dry and deadpan description of his one of his video synthesizers. And so David Jones was working about a decade later, kind of late 70s into the early 80s in his career. Continued, you know, he's still alive, he's still doing stuff. So he's doing things, but he produced a whole line of video synthesizer devices that were really geared towards artists manipulating video signals. So taking these ideas that Pike and Shuya Abe had produced in these handmade one-off kind of things, and made this line of products around them that gave access to the image in really pretty wonderful ways. And so in this voiceover of this demo, you know, he's talking about kind of colorizing and changing the kind of brightness and adding these overlays and doing these keys and stuff. And these are all things that are just now ubiquitous. You know, they're built into you know, all of the tools that we use to create images every day. And so you know, but here we have somebody that's, you know, an engineer working in an art context, creating tools that are, you know, very inspired by what Pike was doing and trying to create this open space, you know, at a kind of material level. Can we go to the next slide? We put a couple images up of the, you know, of what the synthesizer looked like. So he's drawing heavily from audio synthesizers, from modular analog audio synthesizers. And the video signal here is also an analog signal. And so it's a kind of patch bay type device. The picture on the right is the device that was producing the images in the previous video, the MVIP. He made a number of other devices. There was, he for a long time was based in upstate New York, in Owego, New York, where there was a really important art center called the Experimental Television Center that for many decades gave artists access to these sorts of video processing tools that were, you know, that were pretty great. It was a whole room full of, you know, artist, engineer made tools that gave all kinds of media artists access to the signal and to the image construction in this kind of way. If we go to one more, kind of next on this sort of list of you know, people at the sort of intersection of tool making and art making, we've got Gary Hill, and so he's a video artist from California, lived in Seattle for a long time, but especially in the 80s, had a really, really big video career. And David Jones was working with him, so the two of them were associated for a long time. And Gary Hill's installations, his video installations, were really technically advanced and really beautiful, and really kind of found this kind of poesis of kind of poetic image, that really synthesized these technical insights and these kind of art insights, often involving multiple monitors. So in this piece, Suspension of Disbelief, it's this close-up tracking shots of this body, across the body that's kind of moving between these different screens really rapidly. He made pieces that used laserdisc players that responded to people's movements. So you would see these kind of ghostly figures coming towards you and kind of moving away from you as you move towards them, and just a whole variety of innovations around display technology and kind of cameras and work that explored the relationship, say between like text and image. For example, really excellent work. And he's, I think his work is not seen nearly as much today, which I think is kind of a shame because it's just an amazing body of work. That kind of integrates this kind of technical and creative. Could we go to the next one in our hit list? And so this is, of course, this kind of discussion could not be complete without talking about Steina and Woody Vasulka. Woody Vasulka he passed away a couple years ago, but he started off, he's from Czechoslovakia, born behind, under communism, behind the Iron Curtain, and kind of became a political refugee, leaving that background as a filmmaker. And his partner, the Icelandic artist Steina, who is still alive, the two of them together produced a really just incredible body of work that centered around the exploration of video in this very material way, and like David Jones and Pike, did a whole bunch of engineering work and producing tools that created all kinds of amazing images, kind of for the first time, both at the camera level and at the lens level, and also at the signal processing level too, directly. This particular still is from a 1972, I think, video that Steina called Violin Power. That's really great. And in this one, they, as she's playing the violin, the sound of it is controlling this analog synthesizer, and it's producing these waveforms that are kind of distorting this image, as she's kind of playing this sound. So again, like in the same way that David Jones was inspired by analog synthesizers to make his video synthesizers, their work, which is really varied, and it's hard to make overall too grand of summations about it, but they did a lot of work that explored this sound and image hybrid, and using video switchers and mixers that were triggered by sound. It was really great. I've had an opportunity to do some live performances with Steina quite a while ago now, but she's a great individual. And so all of these things, all of these pieces are all in an analog world. They're all hardware based, and all of them are relying on a video signal that's an analog waveform. That has its own properties, has its own rules, has its own things that you do, ways that you can kind of intervene into it. Well, and of course, that world changed. The world changed, and that world kind of ended. And so in that kind of arc of the mid 90s, really the digital image, digital video image became how video was constructed. And the place for those interventions moved from custom hardware into software, into computers. And so we enter into the world of software-based video and software-based tools. Well, that world explodes, right? It's just, once that hardware question has been solved and it's just a digital image, and then it becomes this, thing that's accessible through code, there's just dozens of tools and dozens of artists, if not more, exploring that, in the 90s, and then now it's ubiquitous, and the power of those technologies is, pretty incredible, as we see every day in superhero films. So, you know, in kind of talking about this transition into digital, I figured it's a good time to kind of like sort of talk about stuff that, that I've done, stuff that we've done. So in the next slide, I've got a frame from this software tool that I wrote in kind of starting in 1995, and I worked on it through kind of about 1998 or so, called Whirligig, and it's a live performance software. It's designed for kind of live mixing images, in a live stage context. And I did it a lot with musicians in kind of a VJ sort of thing, but I also did it in kind of theatrical context as well too, with kind of stage shows and things like that. But it really is designed around, the way we used it and kind of the guiding kind of principles behind it is it was meant to be sort of an improvisational type tool. And so you would have sources of video that you would use, that you would feed into it, that you would capture in a frame by frame kind of way. So it's kind of like a big flip book. It's not actually video clips, it is frames from video that you're using. And so the way that we would use it usually was kind of in two different ways. Sometimes it would be about kind of quoting from films, and so we would be doing these live film remixes. So we'd have like a VHS deck connected to the computer, tapes that we wanted to kind of work with. Those tapes would kind of feed in, and we would do these live mixes. Or sometimes it would be with a camera, and so we would have a camera with us, and maybe have like this kind of tabletop of props that we would kind of move the camera around as we're kind of sampling these things from to do these live mixes. And the software itself, never was public tool. I'm the only one that ever used it, and so the interface is a little cryptic, but kind of made sense to me. But it's you have two channels. So you've got this, you see the word background and foreground. Those are your kind of two kind of stack of images, kind of top and bottom. And then you can have an overlay color, or you can have an underlay color. And you have this collection of individual frames. That's what that preview window is. You can kind of see those and scroll through those. And then you would set up, and those preview things are numbered, and so you would type those numbers in, and it would kind of, go between those frame counts. So we see start loop 001 and stop loop 001 from 1 to 10. So it's playing the first 10 images in that in a loop. And there's a variety of little kind of playback ways that it kind of work with, and you could kind of do these color overlays. And so it grew over time. This is close to its. This is pretty much its end state. But we used it a lot. And so in the next slide, if you go to that, I just unearthed this video clip from this kind of live mix rave thing I did in Holland. Oh, the sound is coming from there. Oh no, our sound trick didn't work. No, all right, our house sound thing didn't go. You can still kind of hear something. You just need to turn that sound back on. Yeah, imagine this really loud and really big. But I remember this, and I had bought the newspaper, sitting in Utrecht, Holland, and I bought the newspaper, and so I had the newspaper laid out and the camera, so it's like these are all kind of like frames for me kind of moving the camera across the surface of the newspaper, these politicians and whatnot. But it's all live mix, all using that exact software that we saw, and in these rave contexts, they'd have a lot of DJs, but they'd only have one DJ. So it's like you're there for hours and hours and hours. There was no break for you. So you would just go until you couldn't go anymore, and then you kind of stop or whatever. But yeah, I just found this tape a couple months ago, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. So it was fun to see that. So this is you can go ahead and pause that. Thank you. So yeah, this is kind of mid 90s. Then we used we used this kind of software and video combination a ton in our work. So this kind of went to the into the late 90s, and then kind of in 2000, that whole decade in kind of 2000 to 2010. I'm completely skipping over with these videos of this work, but we did a lot of stuff that leveraged this knowledge, this kind of history, these sorts of interests, and we did all these like TV database projects breaking up TV shows into shots and cataloging those shots. I had to write a bunch of software to kind of figure out how to do all those things, break up these video clips, and so it was this whole way of kind of analyzing film language through treating TV shows and films as kind of found databases, ready-made databases. We did a whole bunch of work on that. We did a whole bunch of projects that were like miniature cinema, film sets, kind of small cameras that were filming these objects, and then those cameras were sequenced and cut together, totally using David Jones era or style, influenced technology to kind of sequence these live cameras together, except we were using a microcontroller, so it's a different, much smaller technology. So we did all these things, and so. And then we started doing these kind of web-based projects as well too, or had been doing these web-based projects all along. I want to kind of turn the corner and talk about NFTs and talk about blockchain. But I realize I'm going long, but I figure we can talk. Right? You can jump in too if you want to. The backstory to all of this stuff, is. It's all super fun. This was great. Really engaging work. I love this work. I love this history. I love this tradition. But you're participating in the art world, right? You're kind of trying to find your place in the art world. And the art world is very much dominated by painting, and very much dominated by art markets and galleries and gallery sales and whatever. And so the poor media artists, unless Gary Hill did pretty well, but everybody but him and Bill Viola, on down, there's no market. There's no way to really participate in the market unless you kind of converted your work into sculptures in some form. That honestly was part of the impetus, for us making these physical pieces, versus say, these beautiful, clips, audio video clips. They're great, they're fun to make, but there's really no market for that. And there's no way to participate in the art market that way. And for a long time, that seems fine. You're kind of like, whatever, you have a job, you get grants, whatever, you're not kind of worried about markets. But there's always that question, kind of like, how can a market form around this work? How can it participate that way? So for me, the kind of turning point came in 2012 when I first learned about Bitcoin, and really kind of fell in love with that technology. Really kind of was fascinated by it. And so it was created by an anonymous developer or group of developers under the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And there's a white paper, meaning a kind of technical document that describes it, and that was published first in the end of 2008, and then the software went live, the network went live in 2009, and just kind of trickled along in the background for a long time, for a number of years. And I heard about it in 2010, was doing other stuff, didn't really think about it, but then in 2012 kind of learned about it again, and this time I started digging into it. And there was just so many, it just connected so many elements of the world together in this odd way, for me. But the thing about it that's relevant here is that the nature of the technology is a kind of alchemy, because it is fully available to everyone. It's an open database that everyone can see. Everyone can see all aspects of it. Yet each unit inside of it, each kind of Bitcoin, is individually owned. So, or can be individually owned. So it's ubiquitous and scarce at the same time. And so that mixture of like it's everywhere, but it's also unique, and somebody owns it, somebody controls it. I found really interesting, and in my mind, it seemed like there was some way that particular combination of things could be leveraged by artists, by digital artists, that at that point were just posting their work online. And in these kind of early days of social media, Tumblr and early Instagram. And so there was just no way to do anything with that. And this was also kind of at the height of Creative Commons and a kind of open source ethos, where it's just like, okay, just give it away, which is great. That's totally fine. But it's like, well, is there an alternative? Can people make a choice about that? Is there a way to use this blockchain technology to create some kind of unique element, some kind of unique aspect to the digital work that is otherwise circulating and all over the place, right? How can, in a digital art context, how can that same ubiquity and scarcity alchemy that I saw in the Bitcoin white paper, how could that be created? And so I started thinking about that in 2013, kind of in depth. And then in early 2014, I had figured out what I thought could work, how I thought that it could work. And I made this. And so what we're looking at here is a screenshot from a website that is looking at the Namecoin blockchain. And so Namecoin was the first fork of Bitcoin, the first other use of that technology for another purpose besides as a payment system and currency. And so I wasn't so interested in the use case that they made Bitcoin for, but I saw in it a way, something a way that I could use it, a way that I could use it differently from what the developers intended to do. And so this is a view of the first NFT. And I would take offense at the proto NFT description. It's not proto NFT. That word doesn't really mean anything. It is a non-fungible token, and it is the first non-fungible token. And it was made on May 2nd, 2014. Now, there's a lot going on the screen, and it's hard to know. It's like, what is going on? So I'll walk you through it. So on the ID number on the right, it's in blue, that starts with FA. That's the transaction that was made at that time. And so that's the token part of NFT. And so, well, technically speaking, it's the address. The N2 number at the very top, that's the NFT part of it. And so with Namecoin, you can see these columns in the middle, name and value. You have a name, and that's meant to be a domain name, but I didn't use it that way. And then you have value, which is just anything that you want it to be. And so I thought, I'm going to create language that I'm going to attach to this that's going to create, it's going to point to something in a way that is about owning it. It's a way that's an ownership reference. So I created this transaction on Namecoin that included this prose statement. ISR title to the file at the URL blah, 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 blah on the web server, with the creator's public announcement of its publishing at the URL blah, blah, blah. And that was on my Twitter. So I made a tweet that said, this is my file. I'm going to reference that here. The file whose SHA-256 hash is D4 blah, 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 is taken to be the file in question. Title transfers to whoever controls this blockchain entry. And so with that language, I brought together a number of things. It's a token because it's a blockchain transaction. It's non-fungible because it's a Namecoin name. And it references a piece of media. It references me and kind of my identity claim, via my Twitter account. And it contains ownership language around owning it. And it's unique. It's a unique transaction such that if I send it to somebody else, the data goes with it, and I don't have access to it anymore. I don't control it anymore. Now it's theirs. They have it, and I don't have it. And so all of the pieces that it talks about are public. McCoyspace.com address, the image is public, the tweet is public, the statements are public, but only one person can control that blockchain entry at a time, and that's the owner. It starts with me, but then it could go to somebody else. If you could go to the next slide. And nobody had done this before. Nobody had put all those pieces together. Back at that time, none of the Bitcoin crowd was particularly interested in that because they didn't really care about art. But I did, and I saw it in there. And so this slide is me and Anil Dash, who helped me publicize this idea at the time at the New Museum, where we were talking about this idea and what it meant. And how to use it. And so at the time, we didn't call it NFT because, what does that mean? We called it monograph, was our word for it. And so in this particular view, we show the elements of it. And the works that we made for this presentation were different than the one that I showed you there because that language became more structured. But the very first one, it's special because it's the very first one, but it's also a prose, it's prose language, which I think is really kind of cool. And so this is in early May in 2014. Nobody understood what we were talking about at all. It was one guy in the audience, people were just like, whatever. There's one guy at the end who was just like, he was a crypto guy, and he's like, I thought about this stuff for a long time. We just saw something really important. This is just, if you're wondering if this was something or not, no, this is really something. I'm like, brother, you get it. So go to the next slide. So that's the work. That's the image. It's the first NFT. It's called Quantum, and it's an animated GIF. Also, it kind of has a tool making story to it because this is an animation I made using processing language, which is so we have a whole seminar just on discrete processing. It's such an interesting project. An artist made tool designed to kind of introduce artists to coding concepts. Really beautiful project. It's the basis for so many important things in the digital art community, from Arduinos and P5.js and kind of on and on. But I used it to make this animation, and that's what it is. So I'm going to jump forward really quick to the next thing. So kind of currently, we can go to that. Yeah, so everybody's got all excited about it. So go to the next slide after that, and play this. So this is kind of what we're speaking about right now. And so this is a piece that we just made a couple months ago called Quantum Leap. And this one is, we spent a lot of time thinking about the algorithms that we made in Quantum and wanted to kind of respond to that or kind of quote those or kind of make a new thing. So the design of this image, we're not always coming from an image processing kind of generative art direction, but these works are, and I like them. And so this piece evolves over time. It's written in P5 and WebGL, but the piece evolves over time. And so it's designed, we were thinking about, a collector living with this work and over a long period of time, how that work could change or evolve. Now, those ideas themselves aren't new ideas. Net artists have been thinking about those ideas for a long time, for decades. But NFTs give you new possibilities for this. And this is what's really cool. So, so the piece evolves. There's this kind of shape in the middle that has a side count. That's a four-sided shape there. And the work evolves kind of from has these black and white. It kind of starts in color. Now it's a five-sided shape. It'll stay that way for a while. Then it'll kind of morph into this sort of mix of color and black and white. There's that. It's the kind of interim state of the five-sided shape. And it's going to go to full black and white like that. And then it's going to cycle to the six-sided shape. So it has these different progressions in it. We're seeing it kind of in sort of fast-forward mode. What's really cool about the piece is there's two components that are at work. First is this is using an Ethereum blockchain. In Ethereum, unlike the kind of primitive stuff on Maincoin from 2014, supports a whole lot more programmability, kind of smart contract idea really kind of lives there. And so our contracts for this piece evolve over time. And so if you own this piece, it will progress kind of through these on-chain dynamics. But what's really cool about it, and what I think is really innovative, and nobody actually has done anything like this to date, is that how it works is that if you own this NFT, you come to this website and you connect your virtual wallet, your digital wallet that holds your tokens, and the software, the token that you have directly speaks to the software. And so the software is generating this image that corresponds to the token that you own just for you. And the only way to have it produce that effect is by having that token. So the website is public, but if you go to it, you just get this little kind of HAL-like, kind of like flashing little kind of thing. It's just kind of waiting. But if you're the collector, you come, depending on which token you own, the 3-sided token or the 5-sided or the 10-sided or whatever, you're going to get that version of the software because the token is directly controlling that software execution process. And for me, that's really an exciting thing. And that we're, this, to my knowledge, is the first artwork that's really doing that. But we're going to see more and more and more of that idea of tokens controlling software processes, that has really interesting context, and probably some negative context for that. But I think in terms of like kind of capabilities for art and art expression, that are code driven, it makes them still uniquely ownable, and it creates the possibility for markets that were not there before, and I think that's a really good thing. So this is my kind of long kind of discussion around the kind of artist tools and where we kind of sit in that, and using that really as the context in which this idea of NFTs that now obviously is worldwide and has very little to do with kind of history of video art tools. But that was my background that I brought to it and kind of thinking about it for the first time. And I think that it's important to realize that NFTs were and are an artist tool, an artist generated tool, an artist created tool that's there to support the work of artists. And I'm really kind of happy to place it in that tradition. So yeah, that's kind of it. Went a little long, but I figured, hey, we've got the time, right?
We've got the time. And there's a lot to unpack in there. And I have notes, and I had a sort of sequence that I wanted to go through, but but I'm going to skip that actually. I wanted to say when I saw the title of your talk and I saw the slides, I was really excited. It's close to the heart of my process, and some of these artists like Gary Hill are touchstones for me as well. And I kind of wanted to start talking about tools and kind of break that apart into digital versus analog. But I think the further you went into your talk, I started to think a little bit about just the responsibility of maintaining some of these things, just from a purely technical standpoint. But when you got to the point where you showed the hash from the first NFT, and in that hash is a URL that anybody can access, but it's also your website that I assume you own, correct? And so I'm just jumping ahead here, but I think that what immediately kind of started to think about what's the responsibility of that for you or for the collector. It's on your server, and so in thinking about tools and media art, that has a long history as well. I mean, Gary Hill's work had to be maintained. Neptune Pike's work has to be maintained as well. And I'm curious about the responsibility within the NFT, if the new version kind of eschews that in some ways, or if that's still. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but at the point of like archiving and that responsibility of the piece in terms of its longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge issue. Of course, and typically those in an art historical sense, those questions are handled under this kind of domain of conservation in conservators and conservatorship. And that's one of the main tasks that we assign to museums, is to kind of conserve the works. They're entrusted to kind of preserve these works, and that's why we have the Met is full of these thousands of year old objects. They're really quite wonderful. And so digital works are uniquely fragile compared to paintings and compared to stone carvings, and they die and go away all the time. And so it's really difficult to so digital conservation is a very nascent field, and it's very challenging. And what's interesting with this is you have this, there's always this level when you kind of talk with blockchain technology. There's this kind of rhetorical flourish that everything is kind of amped up with, and so you get with the idea of the blockchain, it's like it's there forever, right? The blockchain is forever, right? And which is great. It's a great statement. And the reason it may be around a long time is because it has value, because there's economic players, and so that's why having a network, distributed network that also is a value network is important. Is a unique invention on the part of Satoshi, is because people are incentivized to maintain it, right? For the first time, it's not just kind of altruism or goodwill. It's in their own interest to maintain it. So, that was kind of the initial kind of promise of it. Now we're in this kind of crazy world of all kinds of changes, all kinds of stuff going on, whatever. And especially then with NFTs, and so that idea of permanence certainly gets a lot more questionable, right? And so, and that's a very big topic of conversation in the world of in the blockchain world, is this question of permanence. Museums are now quite good at file management, managing the files and things like that for long term. We have this work, I mentioned it in passing of these kind of TV database pieces that we made. We made this work in 2001 called Every Shot, Every Episode, which is a collection of video discs, 278 video discs with these kind of custom-made video players and these little screens that I made. It was when we went physical after all the VJ stuff. We're going to make these physical VJ kits, make these discs and whatever. And this was, this is an insane story, but it's actually true. We did one project with Postmasters, this great miniature elevator thing called Pink Light. And then they say, oh, that went great. We're going to go to the art fair. Why don't you can you have a piece for us for the art fair? We're working on this video kit. Let's take that to the thing. So they show that in the fair. The fair opens up, kind of pre-day, like preview day. And the gallery calls, yeah, the Met just bought the piece. The first piece we ever sold was to the Metropolitan Museum. It's totally insane, totally ridiculous. It was just like what? It was totally bizarre. It was like, wow, okay, that worked. But I mentioned that. I mean, it's a kind of funny fact. But they've had that piece for a long time, and they've done a massive amount of archiving or conservation to that piece. Like there's been 2 major kind of overhauls to it, and a whole like symposium. It's like totally crazy, and we fucked up everything. we did it all wrong. They were just like the Kentucky conservative, like, yeah, that's bad.
Did this conservator expect that when the piece came in, or was that?
They're pretty they're taciturn a lot. It's like going to the nurse. The nurse is just like, yeah, chop your finger off, yeah, okay. Yeah. So they've seen the. But so yeah, with it, but I'm rambling, and you asked a very concrete question about those URLs. Yeah, they need to be maintained, and I think about that, a lot, and I kind of take that on. There's a lot of interest now in kind of decentralized storage and a lot of utopian thinking around decentralized storage. That's going to kind of magically solve the problem. I'm not with that school of thought, but yeah, there's a lot of conservation.
It seems like it might be tricky to unpack that if you have different URLs that belong to different institutions or collectors, but then eventually that URL has to be conserved somewhere with one central institution. And so what does that become? It seems like an interesting question. I guess I had this really general question about how you feel about NFTs at this point. I guess when I look at how they came about and I think about it in terms of some of your earlier work and some of the other pieces that you've done, there seems to be an element of subversion in that. You're making this tool to empower artists, and do you feel it is still, how do you feel about that context now? Do you feel it's still there? You talked about, this notion of the incentivizing, and we see Christie's, we see corporations kind of glomming onto this, and I'm just curious as to did you initially feel as if it was a subversive act in a way, an active art activism, and how do you feel about the trajectory?
That's a great question. I honestly did think it was a big idea at the time. I really thought that it was like this is a big idea, even though nobody understood it, and even though it was as simple as it could be and had zero infrastructure around it. It still, to me, seemed like a simple idea. I spent the last several years after that just trying to get people to understand, and then no one really did, and I kind of got tired and sort of stepped back and lost interest. Well, in that time, the idea gets kind of reinvented and rediscovered and rebuilt through the Ethereum community, and then now really has the hallmarks of that community, and that's the community that has kind of created the world of NFTs that we're kind of inundated with. And that whole world is kind of has a sort of pre-people time and a post-people time, and that sale, the Christie's sale, which really, I think in terms of is like a kind of hostile takeover of the art world, this is, for this amount of money, $69 million, they were able to just completely galvanize the world's attention. They were able to completely just, charge the ramparts of the art
kind of
world.
the meme stocks
Pretty
thing
wild.
happening at the same
Yeah,
time,
totally.
and there was that this
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
weird synergy happened kind of at the moment.
Yeah, but you know, it's like at a market level, it's still this insane market phenomenon. But to your question about, you know, I did see it as a way of empowering artists, and I do think that that has happened. You know, and I think that to me, it's interesting that the work, you know, that has been made there doesn't really look like the art that the art world thinks of as art. You know, it looks, you know, we would call it illustration, we would call it decorative, we would use these other kind of like, you know, terms that are, you know, not good, you know, terms.
I think taken as a whole, it's kind of anarchy. I mean, if you just look at everybody who's minting and using that platform, it is just a free for all in an interesting way.
Yeah.
But I think a way that probably a lot of classically trained artists and art historians may find problematic. But
I mean,
at the
some
same
people,
time,
the classically trained people that have like really good classical skills haven't had a home in the art world really for a long time.
Right.
So now they can make these kind of neoclassical NFTs that NFTs collectors kind of like.
well, yeah, and I guess from an institutional standpoint, that's sort of where I'm coming from. Like from an institutional standpoint, to just see this anarchy that's kind of happening in the NFT world with the people publishing.
Yeah, I
and-
like that. Yeah, I like that. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, good. Coming back to tools a little bit, I kind of was interested in again, kind of in like with the sort of very optimistic and kind of utopian ways that Neptune Pike talked about the video synthesizer, and then drawing parallels into like what happens now with processing and code and how that's sort of come to fruition. I am kind of curious, you know, you talked a little bit about the limitations within those tools, you know, the limitations of what you could do with the video synthesizer or with what Gary Hill could do with the sequencing. And they were very like governed by the medium. And I think in some ways, like I kind of wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that, because you do that in some of your work. You and Jennifer do a lot of work that has this sort of very cinematic kind of sense where you're using some of those tools, those sort of like closed circuit cameras and things like that to create these video installations that, you know, that rely on some of that, but you're also injecting, you know, more modern tools, digital technology, coding and yourself code. And I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear you talk a little bit about those two sides of the coin of tool making, you know, the analog and the limitations there versus the digital, and what are the limitations there. And I guess I'll leave it at that. If that's a question that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, the analog era really has I mean, all of it is all of it is at remove, right? It's like it's all these, you know, electrical circuits that you can't see, you know, and so you can render them in different ways, you know, or you know, yeah, you can they can connect with the physical world in different ways, you know, by making a motor move, speaker move, or displaying something on the screen, you know, or some other kind of mechanism, but they're really abstract in and of themselves. And so you're left with the physicality of the devices, and there's a whole like kind of arc of that. But now it's like we're so post-device, you know, because the phone is just like good enough to, you know, do everything, you know, in some ways. And you know, yeah, I just remember like in the 90s, the whole like film versus video kind of conversation, that's just all gone, right? Just like gone. And so, you know, so now we're in this kind of digital sphere that also has its own kind of layers of abstraction and kind of mystification. And so I guess, you know, it's true that we're, you know, it's hard to generalize across all of our work, but we certainly have made a lot of work that is about trying to open up those processes in different ways, and give people access to them. You know, it's you know, so like the miniature film set pieces are a good example. And those are analog cameras, and it's actually really important that they're analog cameras because of the immediacy of that. You know, you make this kind of diorama. We have this kind of whole set of cameras kind of trained on it. They're all fed into a switcher. There's all kinds of, you know, ridiculous technology that you would never think of to make it switch in the way that you would automatically think it would switch, but it doesn't. You know, you have to kind of do all this crap to make it actually switch right. You know, and so that once again, you're at the thing of like, oh yeah, the machine finally does what I had wanted it to do last week. And now we're there, great. You know, now a week older and thousands of hours, you know, poorer. But the analog cameras are instantaneous to the projection. Everyone wants to wave their hands in front of them. You wave your hand in front of it, and it's right there. If it's a digital camera, you wave and you look, and there's nothing there because there's a buffer, right? The digital camera is a buffer, and so it's inevitable because we've done some work with digital cameras that the length of the buffer is exactly the time that somebody waits to see and then turns away. And so they wave and look, and it's not there, and they turn away, and as soon as they turn away, their hand's there. And so the experience is kind of ruined. The immediacy of it is ruined, even though it's a live camera of an object right in front of them, and you're kind of trying to tell that story. The fact that there's that buffer means that the story is much harder to tell. Whereas an analog camera, they wave their hand, it's right there, technically they've got the proof that it's live. And so there still persists these weird effects between analog and digital that are really interesting. But the benefits of kind of the movement to digitization outweigh the negatives because of the flexibility and networking and there's just so much more to kind of draw on. So I don't miss the analog ways totally. We have a record player and stuff. Shoot film sometimes. I love the analog stuff too. But I do think that the digital revolution has surpassed the analog stage.
Yeah, and I guess there's something about, especially those diorama pieces, that the technology matters, the analog, the instantaneous feed of that camera matters, but it's somehow about more than just that. In other words, you're imbuing it with content. In those cases, it's very cinematic content.
Yeah.
And in that way, it both relies on that tool and that technology, but there's an added layer on there that allows it to kind of escape being about simply that technology. And I think that's again where, a lot of the things that Gary Hill did, it allowed that to happen as well.
Absolutely.
And that's something that, I think about in terms of work with technology. And I've read some things that you and Jennifer have had to say about that. And the idea of the magic of technology and how you implement it properly versus rely on it, too much to sort of hang your hat just on the technology. And I wonder how, when you start projects, when both of you kind of start projects, a lot of questions about collaborative processes, but also like what governs choices you make about what you start with, how you use technology and pieces, because you've worked in just so many different kind of approaches.
That's a great question. There's one side of it in which you sort of like you get sick of a certain thing and then you kind of decide, okay, let's do something different. That's definitely kind of part of it. But your question really is about kind of like our collaborative process, and it's gone on so long that it's hard to really somebody identify. It's been 30 years almost. In a couple of years, it'll be 30 years, and so it's 26 years. Yeah, 26. And so for us, there was a number of reasons why we decided to start collaborating. We had kind of different practices coming out of grad school, for example. And one was we didn't want to compete with one another. We were in this kind of small field, and it was just like, I don't want to, we're going to, it's not going to be about I got it and you didn't kind of thing. And so we wanted to do that. And then also at a really practical level, we wanted to break down as much as possible this gap between everyday life and studio life, art making, art in everyday life. How can that come together? How can those studio boundaries break down and things just kind of flow out? And so that has absolutely been the case, and that continues to be the case. And so that that points to answering the question in a pretty interesting way, because it's just sort of these conversations, like things that you're interested in or things that you're thinking about. Sometimes it might be like we recently made these films. We had this idea for kind of a trio of films, and we made 2 of them, and we're working on the 3rd one. And that was kind of like we really wanted to. We've done so much stuff about the filmmaking process. We wanted to kind of work with, do it and kind of make these films. And so it's really a real pleasure to work with creative.
Yeah, I was curious about that aspect of collaboration as well. And you go to making these films and you work with the dancer, and then you did the space we inhabit, I think is the name of the piece that it was about the luxury apartment.
Yeah. That was the installation version. That was called Broken.
And there were musical elements to that
Yeah,
piece as well. And so did working with Jennifer for years, did that kind of, or you naturally collaborative, or in working together, did that kind of prepare you?
We share so much of a common language now, reference points. So it was like, like with the singer, it was like, we could just say, oh, it should be, it should be sung, and we already know what that entails, what the references are for us for that, and that's going to be, like Robert Ashley primarily, and so, and then filmmakers, so it's like, so it becomes like this kind of shorthand. So it's like, Robert Ashley, or, like, like kind of film references, so they just become kind of touchstones, and that already kind of does it kind of sketches it out a lot. But in terms of the film productions, Jen really takes the lead on those. We do a whole like kind of image research and, kind of like look and feel kind of thing, and think about what we want this thing to look like. The casting on those were both really important. So that happened. But then, but she really maps them out kind of in the storyboard and the screenplay, even though it kind of varies off of that, so we come into those pretty organized. So each one has kind of its own flavor. We're doing these projects now that are based on this kind of drawing machine, kind of large scale drawing machine, and that's one that I've taken the lead on. That it's an idea that I've been thinking about for a long time. And then kind of in the pandemic, it's like sort of a way to kind of focus on that. And that's leading to a whole kind of body of work that I'm definitely the mechanic. I'm kind of keeping it going. But it's still a collaboration around the exhibition and kind of the image concept and the whole like kind of kind of thinking about it. So it really kind of varies.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about like the physical experience, particularly of the viewer and what you expect there. And again, I'm struck by, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately as well, the difference in experience between that and the sculptural pieces you make, the installations you make. And I guess I'm just curious how you feel about the difference in that experience, if you feel that in it, and how you kind of negotiate that.
Yeah. I mean, so these two works, like I say, give a kind of strange look on our work, because we don't really do, the question of abstraction is not foremost in our work, although, I could go through things and kind of talk about it, and so image processing and kind of abstraction, it's been there in the background. But
really good software. I mean, it seems like there's parts of that there.
Yeah, totally.
And it's abstraction, but it's also physicality. There's a lack of physicality to these works that happen on the screen.
Yeah.
Is that a concern versus?
Well, I mean, we had done a bunch of, we've done the really big stuff, but that was always kind of in situ. There was some sort of environment that was happening.
Yeah.
But we'd also been doing a lot of internet projects in the 90s, that were just totally disembodied. And that, had its drawbacks, had its problems. And so, we did this turn to the physical for sure. The NFT stuff for now very much is virtual, it's not physical in any way. Although we're thinking about some ideas that kind of might engage with that. But also the filmmaking stuff, is really physical, although we've shown them in gallery context and always have kind of constructed some kind of viewing environment for them. So the physical world's always there. But to get back to one point of your question, we do think about the viewer a lot and about the viewer's position, and trying to structure that position or give the viewer an opportunity to kind of have some sort of thinking about the time of viewing and the time viewers there, and trying to just create works that can say something in a short time period and in a longer time period. Think about that.
That was something I wanted to ask about as well. I mean, the time is clearly important in this piece because it evolves over a cycle.
Yeah.
And it's important in the cinematic pieces.
Yeah.
And I guess that was, you kind of answered it, but talking about how you work with time, and even I guess talking about how you might, negotiate time in the way you're working with the video, the sculptural video objects, or even the video databases, there's an open-endedness to that time that happens because it's not a linear film. It's not a single channel film that projects maybe loops. It has a duration, but you're kind of opening up that idea of time, and it can then potentially be an unending time, right? There's a sort of a limitlessness aspect to that.
Yes.
And I guess I would imagine it varies from piece to piece, but that must be a concern of yours as you're working with, software in relationship to, say, cinema, in relationship to video.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that endlessness of it is in kind of an open system is very much a kind of core thing that we think about. And a lot of that, I mean, it really traces back to our grad school and the program that we studied in, in a really wonderful kind of pre-digital time. Kind of, the desktop was just the last moment before the desktop network and it took over everything. And so it was really in kind of hybrid state. So this is at Rensselaer Polytechnic in upstate New York in the IER program there. And the things that were important about it that are relevant to this is that it was a combination of music and visual arts. And the musicians really, there was just these key vocabularies that were coming out from the music side around improvisation and around kind of systematic way of thinking and the creation of kind of open systems in a sort of performance way that was really, really interesting. And, we had the great fortune of studying with the composer Pauline Oliveros when we were there. And, her she's just an incredible, was just an incredible teacher, with her, her perspective, and the expansiveness of her perspective. And so I think that in a lot of ways we're trying to answer the call that she laid out.
That's kind of all my notes that I had. I think if anybody has questions, we'd maybe open it up.
Yeah, sure.
Any questions on chat?
Yeah, so we have some questions from online. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
So we have a couple people who are asking what your thoughts are on like the environmental impacts of the blockchain.
Yeah, sure. So the blockchain systems have a pretty unique perspective around energy. And so they're distributed systems, decentralized systems, permissionless, and that's the key insight, the key invention that they have. And so how do you enforce, how do you keep good actors? How do you keep out bad actors and keep good actors so that the system, the integrity of the system, and by that I mean me not sending the same thing to two different people. You got it, but then I also fake it and send it to you as well too. How is that prevented without a central administrator? Right, that's the magic that Satoshi came up with. And so the answer that he came up with was something called proof of work. And so proof of work says that whoever has put the most computational effort into the system in a given period of time has the right to decide and make permanent the transactions that occurred in this last moment block. That's the block part of blockchain. And so the reason for that is because presumably the person that put that computational effort into it had to make an investment of resources to make that computational effort. And so specifically they had to have hardware, and then they had to have electricity that ran the hardware. And so electricity and electricity usage become the basis for the security of the chain. You've got to commit those computational resources. And then if you did that, for that kind of 10-minute window, the system awards you with Bitcoin as part of that process. So all Bitcoin is generated from the rewards that come from that active transaction validation and computation of work. Now the work itself is pointless. It's just this kind of empty kind of computational challenge. It has no significance in and of itself. It's just designed to be the same level of difficulty kind of across time, no matter how many participants in the system. Well, because Bitcoin is ultimately scarce, as there's only 21 million of them, it's a finite resource. And so there's a window of time to acquire those Bitcoin. And so people are kind of calculating, well, if I have these things, and if I can get these things now, the value will increase over time. And so now's the time to put those resources in. And so we've seen an explosion, figuratively, of computational power put towards that task of mining. And it's just grown exponentially. And so the total energy usage of that thing has increased because there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of devices that are doing that. So that's the long-winded way of describing why there's this question about energy use. So people will go, geez, Bitcoin network's using a ton of energy compared to other stuff. That seems like a problem. So my answer to that is a couple of things. The first, it's important to recognize that it's amount of use in the kind of global usage of energy is fractional of a fraction of a fraction. All cryptocurrency transactions across any blockchain network could end tomorrow, and the needle of the world's energy usage wouldn't move. It would be exactly the same. Maybe it would go one needle's width worth. So cement making, airlines, agriculture, all these other transportation, healthcare, blah, blah, all this other stuff goes on and on and on, goes on and on, uses vastly more energy than the Bitcoin network. So I say that to kind of keep kind of perspective. So the answer to that is well, those things are important and cryptocurrency is bullshit. So they should stop and we should keep kind of cement. And then I would disagree. I'd say that Bitcoin provides a unique feature that doesn't exist otherwise. And then I would point to the fact that more and more of this of the mining energy is coming from renewable resources, and kind of the dirtier systems are kind of shutting or kind of going away. And so maybe the long-term picture isn't as bad as what people are saying it's going to be. And then the other kind of element of this conversation is people say, well, there's a way of doing blockchain that doesn't involve uses as much energy as just a regular computer does. And that is if we hand that validating power, that voting power, or that power of validating those blocks and being awarded those coins, if instead of proof of work and computers doing this computation, it's just owners of the currency putting forward like a bet how much they are going to kind of put in play to be the validators, to prove that they're good operators, right? And that's called proof of stake. Stake meaning you're kind of staking in part of the currency. You wouldn't want to kind of risk that because, whoa, if you're a bad actor, those coins are going to kind of go away, and that that seems like a good solution. So there's tons of excitement and interest around proof of stake as a way to kind of have the best of both worlds. I'm not a big fan of proof of stake because I think that with proof of stake, you've created a wholly closed system. There's no outside reference. There's no way for an outsider to come in and participate without essentially buying in from the previous holders. So it's necessarily about how did that initial distribution of coins happen? Well, it invariably happened when the rest of the world wasn't looking, when some people got together and like bootstrapped the system, and it turns out they were the ones holding all the coins. And so they get, they're kind of first in line. And so everyone has to kind of buy in. And so that system of like, you're on the outside and the value holders have already been set up, and you've got to kind of buy your way in, and they're going to kind of dole out coins, to kind of let you in on their terms, and eventually it works. Sounds a lot like the world right now of kind of oligarchs in control of everything. So to me, proof of stake just reinforces an oligarchic financial model that I think is inappropriate. So I'm long-term positive about the energy profile of Bitcoin is going to decline. I'm realistic about its total energy use in the context of all kinds of other energy use in the world. And I believe that the function that it is producing, like other industries that use electricity, is a valuable utility. So I'm not ready to toss proof of work just yet. That's my long-winded answer to a very short question. What the energy use of Bitcoin?
This next question is a little bit longer and regarding art theft and NFTs.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So there have been several instances of exhibitions curated by using minted NFTs that the original artists themselves were against and did not want minted.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the expensive type of art theft and how it affects artists whose work got stolen and sold?
Okay, so trying to understand the question. So first the question sounded like it was about artwork being exhibited without the artist's intention. So you're in a show that you don't control. That sucks. And you know, that the internet makes that uniquely possible in ways that it wasn't possible before. You know, so things like that could happen in the Tumblr era or whatever, because the images are just sort of there. You can't really control their ultimate context. You know, so that, you know, yeah, that sucks, but it's not in and of itself a new thing. The idea of like stuff getting minted and then sold behind artists' backs, that really is, you know, that's theft, right? And that's pretty bad. And you know, the remedies for that are hard, right? There's, I mean, the remedy, you know, there's not great remedies for that. And so I do think that it's, you know, with NFTs, you know, there are still, you know, kind of laws and norms, legal norms that do pertain. People have copyright. People do own these things, and you know, kind of things that are unauthorized reproductions are exactly that. And so you can't really, it's really hard to stop that in the same way that it's possible to walk into a video installation and record the videos from the screen of an art show and have a copy of it. You know, but this is different than that, because the bit, you know, it's the same image, and it's this kind of unauthorized sale. And you know, and again, the remedies aren't that great. You have to kind of battle it on the social sphere, right? You have to identify those, you know, wallet addresses and where the marketplaces are doing that, and kind of try to shut it down there. You can also take, you know, kind of defensive or kind of proactive measures by publicly saying what your official address is, wallet, you know, minting address is, right? And so if you are kind of publicizing, look, this is the real McCoy, right? Let's wait to pull that one up. This is the you know, the real one, and nothing else is. That at least provides market information to the fact that you know, that this is legitimate or not legitimate. Of course, you know, unauthorized use of images is, you know, is a, you know, that happening in NFTs is just kind of one, you know, tip of the iceberg on that, with like kind of deep fakes and whatever, you know. So this is a challenge, and I'm on the side of the unique artist on this one.
What about for images that are in the public domain but may be held in the collection of a museum?
That's just ridiculous, right? So that's just like, right, so images are in the public domain, and somebody comes along and NFTs them and says, I'm selling these on behalf, you know, it's just some sort of like kind of fraud thing, right? Of like, I'm doing a GoFundMe for this disaster, you know, and but the money never goes anywhere. You know, so it's, you know, I think it's kind of ridiculous, and the people that are doing that should stop doing that. But if they're taking images in the public domain and then NFTing them, well, they're certainly entitled to do that. And then it's like, well, can you create a market around that? And then if you do create a market around that, well, then good for you, because then you've done it, right? So those are images in the public domain. So NFTing them, you can't then kind of ascribe limitations to them. They still remain in the public domain. You know, so then you get to this kind of like Richard Prince kind of situation of like, well, I mean, that's a bad example. Because his images weren't in the public domain, but you know, if there was really some, you know, there's a set of images in the public domain, you NFT'd them, anybody else could NFT them, anyone has access to them, right? You know, already, and you're trying to sell them, it probably won't work. But if you can convince people to buy it, then that's the value. The work that you put into that kind of marketing effort is the value. But it seems like a pretty pointless practice, and fraudulently doing fundraisers for art institutions is a terrible thing.
So I think this is the last question we have from the online audience. What is the potential for NFTs to benefit not just individual artists, but also the larger arts community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really optimistic about that. Honestly, I think there's a lot of things, in a lot of ways that can happen. It certainly opens up, one traditional way that art has benefited. There's very easy ways that art can benefit collective, art organizations that we see happening all the time, of like the artist auction, the fundraiser auction, the annual event where artists are kind of asked to donate work and they auction work. And these certainly can be items that can circulate in that way. But the real benefit of, I'll call it tokenization, and I think that we've lived through, experienced this kind of, 40-year arc of digitization, kind of think back to like 1980 and where things were at, and kind of 2021, this kind of 40-year arc, everything becoming digitized, everything kind of changing. We're going to see a same kind of arc like that. Let's call it the same 40-year arc, I don't know, of tokenization, and all these systems are going to get re-engineered around tokens. And it's going to be a very different, kind of strange place after that, but I think that that's inevitable. But so with that in mind, thinking about ways that NFTs can benefit our organizations, I think there's a lot of things. So the kind of corollary to NFTs are these things called DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, that are really a kind of tokenized way of defining community membership and pooling resources in different kinds of ways. And so it's quite possible that an art organization could formulate itself around a DAO that is a kind of collective form of ownership, or can be a collective form of ownership, in which case production or sale or resale of NFTs are kind of going into a kind of common pool. And so if art organizations are willing to move into these alternate and kind of new forms of organization, it could open up new possibilities for themselves. The other thing that I think NFTs could do, and this is sort of alluded to, this is something that Quantum Leap is doing in, kind of a very initial way, but it can provide direct benefits at a software level to token holders. And so websites or other experiences can be constructed that are, in which those NFTs are functioning as a pass, as a kind of VIP pass or whatever, an access pass to those things. And so I think that can be a way of building community in ways that are different than what's happening, than what's possible now, in ways that I think that are pretty interesting. And that functionality can allow for interoperation between organizations in ways that are not really possible now. So if there is some, the Phillips collection could partner with another organization and recognize their tokens, for example. There could be a token swap or something like that, and those patrons could have access to some kind of unique things, on this side that they wouldn't before. And so I think that token-defined communities can pool value in ways that are novel and interesting, and can interoperate between one another in ways that are novel and interesting. Of course, this is all sort of TBD, to be developed in a lot of ways, but this is kind of part of the excitement of the blockchain community, because all of these experiments are just frothing around all the time. And that's really the story behind, once you kind of like drown out the headlines of those kind of big NFT sale numbers and the get rich quick kind of things or whatever, there's a lot of amazing and interesting stuff going on kind of just below that surface. It's really pretty cool. Thank you, online people. Online community. Great questions.
Any questions from in the house? I guess not. Thank you very much. This was fantastic.
My pleasure. Go on, I'm here all week.
All right. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Learned a lot.